Back with another Neon 250 video. As you can see here, I have got Quake 3 working. I just have to copy the DLL into the same directory as the executable and rename it to .dll. So that's great. Now this is actually running on my Pentium 3 1 gig copper mine now. I just installed the additional drivers to patch that. Now you can see the extensions here is blank in Quake 3, so that must be to do with the mini GL driver. I haven't seen the OpenGL extension list empty before, so it must be the way it detects that is not coming through with the mini GL driver. So this here is just the first benchmark on a standard 640 by 480. This is just the default benchmark. This is just to gauge that it's getting sort of, roughly what you expect out of the CPU. As you can see here, we're getting about 91 frames a second, which is pretty close to what I was getting for this CPU. Maybe a touch slower, but that seems within what I would expect that the CPU could do. I just wanted to test this again manually at 640 by 480, at 16-bit color, just to see if it did make any improvements. And then we will just confirm that it wasn't running at 32-bit. And as you'll be able to see from the results shortly, it is the same result. So yeah, the default is still running at 16-bit color. So now I wanted to test it at 1024, max everything except in 16-bit color. I'll do some 32-bit color testing shortly. Just wanted to see what kind of performance we are getting out of it. I'm hoping that it would still do 20 or 30 frames a second in this test. But as you can see here, the performance is really bad. Specifically when you've got blood on the screen. Yeah, this is definitely disappointing, and you can see the screen is tearing in some weird and wonderful ways. I did notice the skybox was flickering a little bit, but I'm not sure if that's just Quake 3. It may happen in other video cards. I haven't specifically noticed it though, but I did on this, so I assume there's a bit of an issue there. So yeah, this is a lot worse performance than I was expecting. I still think the color output of these PowerVR cards is really good compared to a GeForce or a TNT2. The color quality is really nice and sharp, but yeah, the performance is really not there. So I assume that some of it's drivers, but I actually think that this runs a 32-bit memory bus, and it's just using the hidden surface removal to try and overcome that. That's my understanding of it. So normally you'd have a 128-bit bus for a performance card, and this is a lot less than that. So that may come into the factor there. So what are we looking at here? So 16 frames, yeah. I mean, that's really probably half the performance that I think it should get. The next test I'm going to run is the same again in 32-bit color. I want to see if that makes any difference. Now, of a comparison, a Voodoo 4 4500 AGP in this exact benchmark that we're running now gets about 38 frames a second. This is obviously going to be worse than the 16 frames, although it doesn't look significantly lower. So it seems that the 16-bit to 32-bit color change does not impact performance greatly, which is interesting to me because 32-bit color should add more load on the memory, and the fact that it's not even slower means that there's probably a bottleneck somewhere else, and it's not actually the memory throughput of this card. So I'm going to do some more tests to try and work out at what point the performance falls over, because obviously at 640 it was running quite well. So we'll see if it's a resolution thing, or maybe it's textures, too many textures being loaded. I have read that if there's too many textures in the in the scene that can cause the issues we saw in the other video where certain things go missing or the colors go weird. And you can see here, yeah, we get some really weird tearing that occurs. So yeah, I would have thought that this would have, when it came out, should really be hitting the 30 odd frames a second. I think that would have been, yeah, maybe that's a little bit optimistic, maybe even 20 frames a second, but we're nowhere near that with this card. And here you can see we're getting 15.4 frames. So let's try and work out why it's so bad. First, I want to see if making any changes to the texture detail does anything. And I'm just going through and checking what the various options are. So we'll keep everything at 32-bit color because that didn't make a huge difference. And let's just test it with a smaller texture quality. And that looks to be about the same performance there. I don't think that that's any quicker, unfortunately. So let's exit out of that. So let's see if it's the geometry. Now I assume that's probably more CPU impacts from the CPU, but we'll have a look at that one. And again, yeah, the blood, it just kills the performance. This doesn't look any faster, really. So let's take the texture all the way down. You know, maybe at 1024, that is the problem. And it looks a lot worse, but again, the performance is just not there. I don't even think this is significantly faster than when it was running at the full settings, which is really interesting. Oh, look, it might be slightly faster. I wouldn't think that this is significantly better. It's pretty hilarious how weird this game looks with such low texture quality. Yeah, so you still get that weird banding with the blood on the screen. I do think the drivers probably are not, you know, obviously optimized for this game at all. And I'm sure if it was around longer, this card, it would get better drivers and probably could perform better. But so far, it's not looking great. So yeah, 17 frames. Not any different really. So this is where I want to try Bilinear. This is the main change, and see if this makes a difference. I know that some video cards run Bilinear only. I think the 1 and 2 on this game does. Okay, so this is now significantly faster. So I did also change it to 16-bit color, but we had tested the difference between 16-bit and 32-bit before, and it wasn't significant. So I would suggest that trilinear filtering is causing the issue. So let's go and set everything up to maximum, except leave it on bilinear filtering, and we'll leave it with the 32-bit color. So before we were getting, was it 15.4 frames? Let's see how we go with this. I'd actually have to look at some screenshots to compare the difference between bilinear and trilinear filtering in Quake 3. I'm not sure how noticeable it is. I didn't specifically notice a huge difference when doing this. Yeah, so as we can see here, this performance is quite a lot better. It's still a little choppy, so I don't think it's probably not quite playable at this level, but significantly faster. I mean, it looks double the speed. I'm not sure if it'll get quite that. This is kind of more the performance level I was expecting from this card. Yeah, it's still a bit of a slowdown with the blood, but I have seen that in other cards as well. It's just obviously a heavy part of the game. Cool. Yeah, that basically doubles the performance. So that's interesting. I wonder if that's a driver issue or a hardware issue. Still, that is interesting. So I wanted to run 3D Mark 2000 again, just because I wanted to see what performance increase we got with the P3 CPU. It's got SSE, and it's got the CPU is a lot better than a Pentium 2 400. So I think we were getting about 1300 on the Pentium 2, which I didn't think was too bad. I would like to see, again, I would expect kind of like a Voodoo 3 2000 will get 2700 on a similar machine, close to 3000. So I don't know how well the Direct 3D drivers are. The quality is nice, except the splash screen doesn't work very well. So I suspect that a score of 2000 plus or 2500 would be what you would want, considering this card did come out around the time of the TNT2 and the Voodoo 3. Obviously, it was quite late. It's interesting playing with this card. It definitely feels more like a PCX level performance than it does a Cairo level, which is to be understandable. It does have, it is quite an old card. So yeah, we get this annoying issue once we get up to the higher quality tests. I actually don't think this happens in the second test, but in this one it does. This must have more on the screen with all the trees. So yes, unfortunately, it is not happy. Now, I was playing around with some of the driver options. I wasn't able to resolve this one. Again, I'm sure if they kept releasing drivers for it, they would have fixed it. But yeah, unfortunately, even 3D Mark 2000 struggles with this card. So yeah, this game 2 test is okay. It's quite a lot quicker than the first one. So yeah, I don't think that... Oh, that's interesting. I don't remember seeing that on the P2. It must have been struggling to keep up a bit. That was an interesting bit of choppiness there and a bit of some weird graphical stuff going on. Yeah, this is actually choppier than it was on the P2. Like, I think the average frame rate's higher. But it was definitely... Yeah, same problem happened in the last test too. That's interesting. I do wonder what the cause of that is. Yeah, this is really struggling. Weird. It is a weird chip, this one. It's got issue. It definitely has. It's not honestly not an amazing card. I get why it wasn't around for long. I did actually try to get MechWarrior 2 working on it. Unfortunately, I did not succeed. Let's have a look at these results. So yeah, 1800. That's definitely less than I was hoping. So I think there's obviously now we're hitting a GPU bottleneck way before the CPU in that game. Now, to give it some real pain, I wanted to run 3D Mark 2001. This I don't expect to work well at all, but I thought, why not? it is always a good test to run to see driver compatibility and things like that. So yes, I did try to get MechWarrior 2 working with the PCX version of it, and I failed. It didn't detect the DLL or something like that. It might be fixable, but I wasn't able to get it working. Now this is interesting. The GUI, like the HUD on here, is totally messed up. You can't read the frames, and then that locked symbol is weird, and the 3D mark is all blown up. But the actual game itself, other than that weird line that just occurred there, looked actually faster than I expected. That was actually somewhat fluid. Let's see how it goes with the look. This game really, you really kind of want GeForce 3 or at least a hardware texture and lighting to make 3D Mark 2001 perform at any decent speed. Yeah, this test is not faring as well, but I actually think it's a little better than I expected. But yeah, it's got some weird lines going through the screen. Yeah, it's it's an interesting card. Obviously, the drivers are just not well done, unfortunately. Oh, wow. Jeez, that's impressive. I mean, if I was going to keep this card in the machine and was worried about it, I might stop it here, but it's this is hilarious, so let's see what it does. The card's not getting warm. I've just put my hand on it. It's still quite cool. I assume this is just a driver issue, but that's hilariously mangled. It's weird, the splash screen here worked, but in 2000 it didn't, whereas 2000 mostly ran okay, whereas this is just weird. I'd be inclined to run the other tests that it has that test the individual capabilities, not the actual game tests. I might do that another time. It might show us which technologies the card is really struggling with, potentially. Again, I assume that just the polygon count is too high or the textures are too high. I don't think I've ever seen anything this weird in 3D Mark before. Like, it's working, but it looks awful. Let's see if the lobby seems any different. I don't get why the HUD's so messed up. This actually looks pretty reasonable. Nothing's jumping out at me as being too crazy. So I do wonder what the difference between the tests are as to why some are totally messed up and others aren't. So I can run the tests, but it's definitely messed up. So yeah, I'm not super impressed with this card. Not the actual build quality or anything that Anthony's done. It's amazing, but the chip and the drivers itself are obviously very immature, and I'm not even sure why they bothered releasing the card. I think it probably worked quite well on the Dreamcast, you know, with custom drivers and the custom OS, and then it had that custom TNL engine. You know, that makes sense. I'm not sure why they really bothered even releasing it. Maybe they released it and then realised, nah, we're not even going to have the resources to work on the drivers, and that's why it wasn't around for a long time. Because even if they had amazing drivers, I still don't think it would have been able to meet the TNT2 or Voodoo 3 in terms of speed. Anyway, that's a quick look. Let's have a look at the performance. Yeah, 900. That's all right. Cool. Thanks, guys. See ya.